Hello students, today in this video we are going to understand and learn about classes and objects in C++. We know that one of the main idea of object-oriented programming is that data and functions can be put together in a single entity and make this data safe from accidental alteration. So this putting data and functions together in a single entity and making data safe, which is the central idea of object-oriented programming, is executed with the help of classes. So thus, we are going to understand about how classes work in C++. So before understanding how we are going to define it and how the objects are created under a class, we will see a program where we have defined a class and two objects of the same class. So here we understand in depth about the program later, but we'll have a short look on how the program is written and what is the class here and what are the objects here, like that. So we have a class here named small object, and this much is the part of the class. This much is the part where class is defined. And here you can see there are data, there is a data, and there are two functions. So all these data and functions are grouped together, and it is called as a class small obj. Okay, now come to the next part of the program, which is the main part of the program, where you have the main function. There you can see that there are two objects called S1 and S2, and we say that these are two objects which are defined under the class small obj. And you can see here we have accessed the data and we have accessed the two functions, sum data, set data and show data using these objects. Okay, so we can just understand that here there is a class defined and we have defined two objects S1 and S2 under this class. Now we shall make a very closer analysis of class. Here we discuss how a class, what's the syntax of a class and how we define a class. So this is the same example where I have written the top portion or the portion where the class is defined. Now we can see here we start the class definition. So class definition is started by using the keyword class. First we have to use the keyword class and then we have to name the class. Any name you can use. Here small obj is the name given to the class. So first we have to use the keyword class, then the name of the class. Then we have to give the braces, open the braces as usually you do a main program or when you define a structure. In every way you actually open a brace. Similarly, you have to open the braces. Next thing is we have a data here. Okay, the data is here named as this variable is named as sum data, and this is of integer type. So I have written int sum data. Now we can see, and this data is called data members or member data. Now we can see there are two functions. First function is void set data intd, and you know that we use void because this function doesn't return any value. Now it has got an argument named d and it is of integer type. Okay, so basically what is the function is, and the function, what function it is defined here. That is, whatever you give as the variable D will be assigned to the variable some data. So some data is equal to D is the function. And we call this function as member function. So any function defined under a class is called as a member function. So it is a set data is a member function of the class small obj. Similarly, you have one more function called as show data, and that is also doesn't have any return value, so it is defined as void show data and doesn't have any argument. And what the function is that whatever you give as some data will be displayed as on the monitor. So it is see out data is some data. So what this function executes a instruction, that is whatever data you give as some data, whatever data is assigned as some data, that will be shown on the monitor in this way. Data is some data. Okay, and these two are called the member functions in the program. Then you can see that there is the brace is opened, which was opened is closed here, and we have put a semicolon. And this we have to keep in mind that whenever you start a class or whenever you define a class, after closing the braces, then you have to put a semicolon like in the structures. Now there is another important thing which you might have noticed here is the use of the keyword private. Okay, so this is a very peculiar property of class that we know that data can be put protected in a class. That is, nobody other than this class can actually interfere with the data, or you will not, for not making any accidental alteration, you can make the data protected. So in order to make the data protected, you have to use the keyword private, which means that this is a very private property that no other class can access the data. Okay, so this is one important keyword which is used in class, that is you can define data by making it private. Now, so this is the one important thing. And another thing is you can make functions public. Okay, so that means that you can use the keyword public, which means that any class outside this or any part of the program outside this class can access this function. Okay, so basically a data will be accessed through this function so that the data will be safe and secure in the program. So we use the term public mostly. Most of the time, the functions are used with the keyword public so that you can use the function from anywhere in the program. Okay, so these are two important keywords used in the defining a class, that is private and public. So thus, we can see that what is basically happening here is a very important property of C++, that is data hiding. We know that data hiding, basically the primary mechanism is to put the variable in a class and make it private. So if you put a variable in a class and make it private, then the data hiding is actually worked out. And this is the primary mechanism of data hiding, and that is actually implemented using the class. Now, the private data and functions can only be accessed from within the class. You have seen in the previous example that the function was defined as public, but then you can make the functions also private, but most of the time the functions will be defined public. So if you make the data and functions private, it can be only accessed within the class, and one class's data is hidden from other classes. No other class can actually access this particular data. Thus, data hiding means that the data is concealed within a class so that it cannot be accessed mistakenly by functions outside the class. So this is all about the class and the data hiding feature of this particular class. Now, usually data within a class is private and functions are public. So that is the usual case, but you can define otherwise also. So data within a class will be safe from accidental manipulations, while functions that operate on the data are public and can be accessed from outside the class. And that is why we define data as private and functions as public, so that functions can be used from anywhere outside the class. But the data can be put safe. Now we are going to see how we define objects in a class. So this is the same part of the example, but then the next part where we define the objects. Okay, here we can see that after the main function, defining the main function integer main, after opening the braces, the first sentence or first instruction is that you put the name of the class here, and we had defined the class as small obj. So we use that particular name, and then after that, two variable name or S1 and S2. These are basically objects, and this is how we define objects in a class. That we have to, first we have to assign the name of a class, and then after that, in the name of the class, you have to define two objects. So here I use the instruction small obj, which was the name of the class, and then the name of two objects S1 and S2. So I can say that S1 and S2 are two objects of the class small obj. Now you can see that the objects are defined in the same way that you define a data type. For example, suppose I have a variable x, then I will define the variable x. If it is of integer type, I will define int x. It is in the same way that the class and the objects are related. So how a variable is related to its data type, it is in the same way that an object is related to its class. Okay, so an object has the same relation to a class that a variable has to data type. Int x, it is in the same way that we define small obj s1, s2, because there are two objects here. So when we do this, we always say that an object is an instance of a class. Okay, we always say that object is an instance of a class, and hence creating objects in a class is called instantiating them. Since class object is an instance of a class, we call that as instantiating. When we define or create objects in a class, we call it as instantiating them. Now we'll see about the functions in the class. You can see here function, two functions, set data and show data, but they are actually called twice. Each of them is called twice. The set data is called in the name S1, and again it is called in the name S2. Again, you can see show data is called in the name S1, and again it is called in the name S2. Okay, so that is, now we can see. It is very interesting to see how a function is called here. Till now we had been seeing that the function is called with just simply by calling or writing the name of the function. But here, when you define objects under classes, and then when you call a function which is under the class, it is called in a different way. So that syntax is like, first we have to name the object and then put a dot symbol, and then you have to call the function, write the function set data, and then in brackets we have to put in an argument which is of integer type. For example, here we have put in as 1066. Okay, so the syntax s1 dot set data, then in bracket 1066, is used to call a function that is associated with a specific object. Okay, so specifically I define or I call the function set data within this object S1. And because set data is a member function of the small object class, it must always be called in connection with an object of this class. Okay, that is, we know that set data is a function defined in the class small obj, and S1 and S2 are two objects defined in the class small obj. So when you call a member function of the class, you can only call the member function associated with an object of the class only. That is why I call the member function in connection with an object of the class. That is, the object of the class is S1. Similarly, if we have more objects, I can always call the same function under or in connection with all the objects of the class. So here I have defined it twice, one in connection with S1 object and another in connection with S2 object. Okay, now we have to keep in mind that this is also one, this is the way we used to call a function most of the time that we have studied before studying or before defining classes. Whenever we call a function, we used to give the name of the function and then the argument inside. So this was the call for a function, but then you have to keep in mind that this is wrong here. You can only call a function in terms of its object. Okay, so thus to use a member function, a dot operator like this, we call it as a period. So dot operator connects the object name and the member function. Always when you call a function within a class or in a class, what you have to do is you have to first actually use the object and then put the dot symbol, and then you have to write the function. So this dot operator basically connects the object name and the member function. Okay. Thus, here we have set data twice. That is S1 dot set data sets the variable some data. Okay, when you refer to the program, you can understand that basically set data function, what it does is whatever you give as the argument will be put or would be assigned as the value of some data. So as for this particular statement called sets the variable some data in the object S1 to the value 1066. Similarly, the S2 set data 1776 sets the variable some data in the object S2 to the value 1776. Now, thus we have here two objects whose some data variable have different values, two different values. So we have two objects, and these two objects have, since these two objects are objects of the class small obj, both of them will have the some data variable, but this variable will have two different values. Now we have another set of function, that is show data, and what it does is it will actually cause the variable some data to be displayed on the monitor, and that is the basic mechanism or basic duty of this particular function. So what here it does is show data function will cause the two objects display their values. So these two objects can display their individual values of the some data on the monitor. So these values will be displayed, and that is the function here. So so here we have discussed a small example of a program where you have defined a class and two objects, and we have discussed how basically the class and the objects work unitedly, or how it effectively work in a program, and how the data hiding property and the main purpose of the object-oriented programming is working out. I hope you understood, and if you have any queries, please put it in the comment box. Thank you for patient listening.